people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this. Unbeaten up-and-comer and amateur standout of Canada, Mary Spencer posted this via her social media, and it reads, I love my team, and I can't wait for us to be back out on September 9th at the casino in Montreal. This will be an Eye of the Tiger.
Mary Spencer is with Eye of the Tiger management.
She's going to be boxing on the undercard of Christian McBilly versus DeAndre Ware. Christian McBilly, hard-punching guy you want to keep an eye on, you want to look out for. The same rings true when it comes to Mary Spencer, one of the more statuesque and dangerous, well-seasoned fighters, well-schooled.
Amateur standout turned professional boxer last year.
Mary Spencer debuted as a professional in August of last year, and she has fought 5 times since then, 2 times last year, 4 times this year. This upcoming fight in September will be her 5th, and this is what you want to see from an unbeaten up-and-comer.
This is the kind of schedule that an unbeaten up-and-comer needs to be on.
This stage in the fighter's career, what you are attempting to garner is experience. Get those rounds in the bank.
Mary's got 6 professional fights, has yet to fight in a 10-rounder.
A hard-punching fighter, those well-placed shots might make it difficult for Mary to go the distance with any of these fighters at or around these weights because she's quite powerful.
The last fight with Chris Namis was scheduled for 8 rounds, but Mary finished it in just 1.
Just 1 round, scoring 2 or 3 knockdowns. As I recall, Mary Spencer made short work of the former IBF champion, who was coming off a knockout loss to Natasha Jonas. Better still,
Mary was able to meet and exceed my expectations because I was expecting Mary to knock Chris Namis' block off.
And at this point in the juncture, anybody that lays eyes on Mary Spencer and her boxing can easily identify her as a quality operator, a world-class fighter that poses a grave threat to anybody holding an alphabet title at 154 pounds. And it just so happens that Mary Spencer is inching closer to just that. She is inching closer to fighting for an alphabet title by way of the WBA, by way of the IBF.
She's not ranked by the WBC.
And the WBO doesn't seem to publish rank standings when it comes to their female fighters on their website, though by way of the WBA, Mary Spencer is coming dangerously close to boxing for the WBA title, as she is ranked at number 4, behind Cynthia Lozano and Marianne Alborg.
The same rings true in the IBF's rank standings. Mary Spencer comes in at number 4 there as well.
Coming in at number 4 behind Michaela Lauren, behind Marianne Alborg, with Chevelle Hallback coming in at number 1, the very experienced, seasoned Chevelle Hallback.
I don't know which alphabet title specifically Mary's got her eye on, which alphabet title specifically she'll end up fighting for first.
But she's well on her way, and by way of the WBA, she'd have to face Scotland's own Hannah Rankin, who has successfully defended the WBA title since procuring it against Mexico's own Phoenix Ayala. There are rumors and rumblings that Hannah Rankin could end up facing either Natasha Jonas in a unification match or Terry Harper in a voluntary title defense. In any event, the winner of that fight, whoever it is, may have Mary Spencer to have to answer to.
And listen, those are all good fighters, very good fighters. Natasha Jonas, Terry Harper,
Hannah Rankin, they're all good fighters, more experienced professionals than Mary Spencer, but I gotta tell you, I give Mary Spencer good odds to beat any one of those 3 fighters, any one of them.
And it's not because they're not good fighters. They're all good fighters, but we know that Natasha Jonas and Terry Harper, those aren't true junior middleweights.
Hannah Rankin, experienced fighter, veteran fighter, and champion. Good fighter that she might be, solid and tough, don't shy away from a challenge. I see a similar situation to what we saw in Rankin versus Marshall in a potential Rankin versus Spencer fight.
Because Mary Spencer, like Hannah Rankin, is a statuesque fighter, very tall.
She's a very hard puncher. It's safe to say that Rankin versus Spencer could end like Rankin versus Marshall ended because Mary Spencer ain't nothing to fuck with.
By way of the IBF, you got Michaela Lauren, Marianne Alborg, and Chevelle Hallback ranked ahead of Mary Spencer.
Didn't even realize that Michaela Lauren was still boxing, that she's ranked in at number 3 by way of the IBF. I could have swore she retired some time ago. Better still, Michaela Lauren, like Chevelle Hallback, she's a seasoned fighter. They're both seasoned fighters. They're both aging fighters.
They've both had some ups, had some downs.
They are not in the same place in their careers that Mary Spencer is in hers. You'll notice that Marianne Alborg once again appears in the IBF's rank standings.
Marianne Alborg of Sweden.
Marianne Alborg, who's coming right off her first professional loss against Patricia Peterle. Marianne Alborg, who's supposed to be returning to action to attempt to rebound off that loss.
She's supposed to be returning to action next month on the 20th and could come down to Marianne Alborg versus Mary Spencer.
It just might, by way of the WBA or the IBF, because they're both ranked by way of the WBA and the IBF. And Marianne Alborg, unlike Chevelle Hallback, Michaela Lauren,
she's not an aging fighter. She's a fresh-faced youngster who's in a similar place in her career to where Mary Spencer is.
And I could see a situation to where a fight is ordered between them by way of either the IBF or the WBA. Marianne Alborg, who's supposed to be returning to action next month, and Mary Spencer, who's supposed to return in the following month. In September, I could see a final eliminator being ordered between Mary Spencer and Marianne Alborg.
Hannah Rankin's got the WBA, and Canadia's own Marie-Eve Dicaire, she's got the IBF.
The story's supposed to be that Marie-Eve Dicaire is currently waiting out the winner of Patricia Bergult versus Cecilia Brækhus by way of the WBC for Patricia Bergult's WBC title. It seems that Marie-Eve Dicaire is within Mary Spencer's crosshairs, and I gotta tell you, I like Mary's chances.
Being honest with you, I like Mary Spencer's chances against just about anybody and everybody at 154 pounds.
Mary Spencer, who's supposed to be returning to action in September against an opponent that has yet to be announced, and we'll keep you posted once we know who that opponent is. In men's heavyweight news, by way of Boxeo Telemundo's Instagram account, Andy Ruiz versus Deontay Wilder for the full WBC title. According to U.S. media, the WBC will order a heavyweight fight.
A fight between the former champions Andy Ruiz and Deontay Wilder if Tyson Fury doesn't make a decision.
If he doesn't announce a fight by October. And on that kind of schedule, that would make Andy Ruiz Deontay Wilder's first fight since having lost to Tyson Fury for a second time, it being that Deontay Wilder hasn't rebounded off that loss yet. He hasn't announced so much as a tentative fight date.
You know, I feel like the WBC manipulates their rank standings just as much as the WBA.
They manipulate the rating system. They play favorites the same as the WBA does, though somehow they manage to stay out of hot water. They're not under scrutiny the same way that the WBA is under scrutiny, though I think they should be, because Deontay Wilder has managed to maintain a top spot in the WBC's rank standings since he lost the WBC title 2 years ago.
You notice how they're playing with the idea of Deontay Wilder versus Andy Ruiz as opposed to Deontay Wilder versus Frankie Sanchez.
As opposed to Deontay Wilder versus Joseph Parker, as opposed to Deontay Wilder versus Joe Joyce. All guys that are ranked ahead of Andy Ruiz. And coincidentally, this whole time, we've figured that the PBC would like to put together a Deontay Wilder versus Andy Ruiz Jr. pay-per-view. It seems to me that the WBC's orders always seem to align with what the promotion wants when that's not their job. It's not their job to make things easier on the PBC. Easier for any promotional outfit, really. It's their job to keep the ranks moving. Keep the ranks moving along. And Deontay Wilder...
You say that as a former champion, he should get some consideration. He shouldn't drop too far in their rank standings.
But he didn't. After initially losing the WBC title to Tyson Fury in their second fight, he was allowed to maintain a top spot, so he got that kind of consideration.
Why the hell is he still getting it now? He's lost to Tyson Fury for the second time.
For perspective, Anthony Joshua lost all 3 of his alphabet titles in his last fight with Alexander Usyk, and he dropped all the way down to number 4 by way of the WBA, the IBF, and the WBO. None of them have Anthony Joshua ranked at number 1, ranked in a cushy spot. So why does Deontay Wilder, who's already stopped 2 times by Tyson Fury, get more consideration as a former champion than Anthony Joshua does when Anthony Joshua didn't get stopped like Wilder did?
And unlike Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua was a unified champion to date. Deontay Wilder never unified anything in the heavyweight division,
having beaten only one active reigning world champion for one world title in the heavyweight division. Unlike Anthony Joshua, who beat Charles Martin for the IBF, beat unbeaten Joseph Parker for the WBO, won back his alphabet titles from then reigning unified champion Andy Ruiz. He's beaten 3 active reigning world champions to Deontay Wilder's 1. He's a 2-time heavyweight champion himself, and he doesn't get the consideration by way of the WBA, the WBO, and the IBF that the WBC is currently giving Deontay Wilder, who lost for the 2nd time to Tyson Fury months ago.
I'm just saying it's obvious that the WBC wants to do what they can to put that title back in Wilder's hands.
It's kind of obvious. You could argue that perhaps when Wilder first lost the title, he deserved some consideration as a former WBC champion himself, but he's already lost to Tyson Fury 2 times, and he still has a top spot. Those ranks are practically frozen.
Might be much ado of nothing, because we don't know that Tyson Fury's going to vacate the WBC title anyway.
He might not. If Anthony Joshua can reclaim his 3 alphabet titles, most people feel that Tyson Fury will come out of his quote-unquote retirement. Tyson Fury, who initially stated it'd take $500 million to get him out of retirement because he was done fighting and he didn't want to do it anymore, which quickly changed into he'd fight Anthony Joshua for free.
Does that same offer apply to Alexander Usyk?
The situation at heavyweight involving the WBC title is in fact immaterial, to say the least. And what the WBC can do if Tyson Fury decides not to retire and targets the winner of that fight, they can perhaps order a WBC final eliminator between Andy Ruiz and Deontay Wilder in order to crown their next mandatory challenger, though you will notice that they skipped right past Frankie Sanchez, who's currently ranked ahead of Andy Ruiz.
It's not by accident. The last thing Wilder's people want is a high-risk, low-reward guy for a rebound fight like Frankie Sanchez.
A guy like Frankie Sanchez, he's not on Deontay Wilder's radar. Frankie Sanchez is pretty much up the creek without a paddle because he's a PBC fighter on the same side as several other PBC fighters, more well-known fighters than himself, but he's not having any luck getting those fighters in the ring. Andy Ruiz has got his eyes on Deontay Wilder.
And I'd wager Wilder's people would rather do a fight with Ruiz than do a fight with Frankie Sanchez.
Frankie's fucked. That's what Frankie is. Back to Wilder and Andy. Well, stylistically, it's a winnable fight for Deontay Wilder because Andy Ruiz is Achilles' heel. One of the drawbacks that he's always had is he's got heavy feet.
He's got good hand speed, mid-range to inside, quick counters, some power.
He can be lethal within close quarters. Anthony Joshua knows all about that, but he's got to get there. And given that Deontay Wilder's best punches are his straight punches, and given that Andy was knocked down by a faded Chris Arreola in his last fight, on the face of it, on paper, it's actually a winnable fight for Deontay Wilder. The problem is,
we don't know what kind of headspace that guy's in. We don't know that he wants to keep boxing.
So much of this situation is immaterial right now. We don't know that either Andy Ruiz or Deontay Wilder get to fight for the newly vacated WBC title because we don't know if Tyson Fury is going to vacate it. We don't know if Tyson Fury is going to vacate it because it depends on who wins Joshua versus Usyk too.
This guy can't shut the fuck up about Anthony Joshua, though most people feel Usyk's gonna beat him again.
And if Alexander Usyk beats him again, do you think that Tyson Fury will keep the same energy for Usyk that he's exhibiting for Anthony Joshua? I'm not jumping to conclusions and making bold proclamations. That's a legitimate question because he's not calling out Usyk the same way he's calling out Anthony Joshua.
So if Usyk wins, does he want to fight him for free?
So very immaterial at heavyweight. And just in keeping with the theme of heavyweights and immaterial situations, Jarrell Miller in action this past weekend, was in action for the 2nd time since the ban on him was lifted. He was in action against journeyman Derek Cardinas.
Jarrell finally returned to action late last month against Jarrell Bracamonte.
And what appears to have been a festival of some kind staged by the WBA at the casino in Buenos Aires, Argentina.
Came back against Argentinian slugger Jarrell Bracamonte.
Jarrell Miller's first fight in approximately 3 or 4 years, and as you can imagine, he looked like a guy who hadn't boxed in approximately 3 or 4 years. You could see the quality in his work, his punch placement, his accuracy, defensive highlights, that he was in fact a better boxer than Jarrell Bracamonte Bracamonte, though as far as being a better physical specimen, it was hard to separate them at times. You could see that Jarrell Miller landed hard shots that actually hurt Ariel, but he couldn't keep up a sustained attack.
He couldn't put more than a few punches together at a time with Ariel Bracamonte.
We had looked close to stopping at times, though he just couldn't follow up, couldn't finish the guy off, which directly speaks to the condition of Jarrell Miller ahead of what was that Ariel Bracamonte fight.
Jarrell Miller didn't look like the same guy that he used to look like 4 years ago.
Because one of Jarrell Miller's standout qualities as a fighter 4 years ago, before he was banned, was his work rate, his volume, given his size, the fact that he's a heavyweight that regularly weighs upwards of 300 pounds. He had some hell of a work rate, and I think we all now know why that was.
That was always a red flag for me.
That and Jarrell's aversion to enrolling in the clean boxing program. Nevertheless, it's all water under the bridge and change in the couch cushions. He returned to action last month against Ariel Bracamonte in Argentina. More recently, this month,
He won a unanimous decision against Ariel Bracamonte last month.
This month, he racked up a fourth-round TKO stoppage over Derek Cardinas. He ate a big uppercut that sent him reeling to the canvas. Referee waved it off. Looks like Derek wanted it to go on.
Wasn't his call, it wasn't his decision to make.
Jarrell Miller weighed in at a whopping 341 pounds for the Bracamonte fight. He was down 13 pounds for this past weekend's fight, weighing in at 328 pounds. He's trimming the fat.
Literally.
Though as stated, there's more work needs doing because he can't apply the same sustained pressure that he used to 4 years ago. Now, you can chalk that up to inactivity. You can chalk that up to Jarrell Miller finally being off the sauce.
Like I said, 4 years ago, one of Jarrell Miller's standout qualities was his work rate.
The fact that he was such a big guy that could throw punches in bunches, such a prolific puncher for such a big and heavy guy. Heavy even as far as heavyweights go. Still an unbeaten fighter here today. With a professional record of 25 wins, no losses, and 1 draw. 21 knockouts, believe it or not. He's still serviceable.
Just about as serviceable as Lucas Brown, Luis Ortiz, and Alexander Povetkin. Now you tell me, what do all those guys got in common?
What do all those guys have in common with Jarrell Miller?
Tell you what they got in common with Jarrell Miller. They've both been popped for banned substances more than once. 2 times apiece between those 3 guys.
Lucas Brown got popped for banned substances 2 times, as did Luis Ortiz and Alexander Povetkin. The same rings true for Jarrell Miller. Those fighters were allowed to reintegrate themselves into the sport of boxing, and
the same rings true for Jarrell Miller. The same rings true for Jean Pascal, who very recently returned to action against Ming Feng Long.
Do you remember that Jean Pascal tested positive for something like 3 or 4 different banned substances?
He very recently came back to the sport, and so has Jarrell Miller. And all I'm saying is, I'm not going to lose sleep about it. It's not the first time that's happened.
Jarrell Miller, who is still an unbeaten fighter, serviceable, 34 years old, certainly not the youngest heavyweight, but far from the oldest, being promoted by Greg Cohen and Dimitri Salita.
I'm not going to bore you with the virtue signaling. Jarrell Miller ain't the first fighter that tested positive for several banned substances but returned to the sport. The real question here is,
where does he go from here? Because he's burned bridges with Matchroom, he's burnt bridges with Top Rank. Does he pop up at the PBC?
He's still an unbeaten fighter.
Between Greg Cohen and Dimitri Salita, they can get him fights. That they can do. They can get him a couple more Derek Cardinas and Ariel Bracamonte. So ultimately, what's the end game?
He's rebuilding himself. That much is obvious. But rebuilding himself to do what?